Well, hello, everybody. Continuing the tradition of Wednesday Live. Coming soon. All right. Getting all comfy here. There's Jennifer. She's every time I go live, Jennifer is on her way to lunch, or heading back to work. Nice to see you. Okay, here's a theme we can get into: the repression of anger on the path, those kinds of things. It's probably juicy to get into today. So if that's something that you're interested or willing to talk about, let's jump into it. Anger is such an interesting experience, such a strong feeling. Oh, it's dinner time. Yeah, of course. In the Netherlands, I think you're 8 hours ahead. So that would mean that it's 7:30 in the Netherlands. Anger on the path, frustration, the fire, the dragon, the jaws of the dragon. Really common for people to want to stuff that, or there's really two methodologies that come along with that. Two methodologies of compensation. There's the explosion, the repression to explosion, the yelling, angry action. If you express anger in such a way, just see if you can recognize that when in the midst of that type of anger, some practices or methodologies will say to beat up a pillow or whatever, but that is actually really ineffective. It's actually been shown scientifically that the more often we outwardly express anger, that will become a go-to. We won't actually reconcile or come into contact with that experience. Instead, what we'll do is we'll be more likely to have sudden reactions around anger. Then there's the other way. This is the crucifixion that we could say. We're crucified between these two experiences. The other way is the stuffing, the ignoring, the moving away from, the repressing. We don't often get into this just because anger isn't necessarily a pure experience. I mean, it's intense, yet it tends to be overlaying something else. You've probably had this experience in the midst of feeling a lot of anger that once you start to get into it and allow yourself to express it in some way, maybe not outwardly, but just experience the feelings that seem to be associated with that intensity of anger, you begin to start to see that it's usually covering up something closer to hurt or fear. It is in itself an emotion of protection, a protection mechanism. So that can be kind of be useful to see. Then we have anger in relationships with other people. We have anger with circumstances. But if we sit with it carefully and we become really still with anger, we start to realize that it's an outburst of energy. It's a reaction to something else, and it begins to point a little bit more directly. But it's also extremely useful and crucial to be able to step into it honestly, to allow that fire to burn. I mean, that's where the purification occurs, in the burning. It's also really akin to desire. It's really akin to sense of longing. These things seem to overlap quite a bit, and the fingers are intertwined, so to speak, kind of like that. So if you're into it, I have a lot of interaction so far this morning. Tia's here, Gus, nice to see you, Patty. Jennifer broke an innocent headset on Monday. Okay. Yeah. What is it to rest with anger? What is it to come in contact with anger? Do you notice the thoughts that tend to arise when there's anger that's arising? Do you notice the patterns? Are they self-deprecating? Do they point to a sense of self-judgment? This is one of the trickiest parts about the experience of anger or frustration as it comes up, is that oftentimes there's like a secondary reaction about, this means something is wrong with me. That's just subtextual. Of course, it's probably a lot more aggressive than that. I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve happiness, these things, these thoughts. This is why we don't rely on the thoughts especially, but they can become a portal in the exploration of this. What is it like to sit in the midst of anger? What is it like to be still but absolutely in contact with the feeling? What is it like to burn in that fire? What is it like to crawl directly into the dragon's jaws? That's really what it's all about here. I think what you will find is, if you explore anger honestly, you'll find that the repression of anger is a pretty common experience for human beings. And what tends to happen with triggering is that there's a repression, and then there's like thought pressure that builds, and then that eventually can lead to some sort of outburst. And that's, where it seems like damage is done. It's a very human experience. There's actually nothing wrong with that type of energy. It's just misunderstood. We seem to have some kind of fear around coming in contact with it. Jennifer says the energy was so intense, I wanted to jump up and run around. Okay, so this is the piece right here. Anger is so intense, so strong, it tells us we have to do something. It's basically begging us for anything other than this. Anything other than this. And that's where the expression of anger comes in, because it's actually an attempt to alleviate the sensation, to alleviate the feeling. That's what's happening there. So like I said, we're kind of crucified between these two compensations. Most of us actually experience both. Most of us don't have a singular go-to here. Most of us, it's a combination of some sort of repression leading to some sort of explosion, some sort of outward expression. And, the past, like psychology around it used to say to express it. They used to encourage people to break shit and punch pillows and scream. Expressing, of course, can be valuable. The trick is, though, with anger, the more often we go to that, we're looking for a way to alleviate the intensity. The encouragement here is sit in the intensity. Test threshold in the intensity. Don't go the other way. Don't repress to the point where you don't feel it or you're not in contact with it. And also don't lean into running around breaking shit. It's kind of, it's so funny. I don't know why, but in non-duality or most spiritual circles, anger is such a hot button topic. People really don't want to talk about it, even in session, even if it's someone that's been working here for a while. There's just a very strong desire to avoid getting into that experience. What is that? What's the fear about? What's so wrong with that experience? There's so many, it feels so personal for us. Oftentimes it seems to be triggered by outward experiences, but here's the truth. Just consider this. Anything that you can ever feel, you are always feeling. Which means if you can be brought to an outburst of anger, then it's there now, but maybe the context isn't being applied. This is a little bit more of a clue of how the mind functions. It needs to have justification. It needs to have reason. So it's almost like a form of defensiveness that's just constantly vigilantly on the lookout for some justification to express or to be angry. You might have had this experience too. Maybe you wake up in the morning and you're just really pissed off. and you're just looking for someone to do or say the thing that will allow you to fully enter into that experience. That is repressing and then compensating outwardly. That's all that is. But what would it be to just rest absolutely still in the fire? I mean, this is the Buddha metaphor. And it speaks to these extremes of the human experience, the extremes of our perceived sense of duality. Siddhartha, he grows up in the wealthiest kingdom known to mankind at the time, has everything at his disposal. One day he goes into town, and he's in this carriage, and he looks out and he sees people starving in the street and people fighting and people with leprosy, and he sees suffering for the first time. He didn't know about it because he had been so sheltered, and that had an indelible effect. And so it eventually led to him fleeing his safety and his environment and becoming an ascetic. So he comes from this extreme wealth into extreme poverty, and he's baking in the sun and starving himself to death. And then at one point, a woman hands him a bowl of rice, and he eats the rice, and he sits at the base of this Bodhi tree. And there is where he is confronted with Mara, the god of temptation, desire, Mara. And while resting there, Mara lights him on fire with temptation, desire. Does that sound familiar? That burning? In the metaphor, he's literally burning. But it's an internal fire is what they're speaking to. And instead of leaning one direction or another, leaning into a repression of the experience or leaning into an absolute expression of the experience to alleviate the feeling, he just rests and allows himself to burn and burns into nirvana. There is your clue. I can tell you what happened. Someone mentioned something I should have done that I had overlooked. Oh, well. So what? It means nothing. And yes, and then she says, but I was already upset or ticked off before that. So, right. So we were looking for, this is just a mechanism of how it happens. It's just really common. This is also more evidence to show that the identity that we think is so unique to us, the identity that is me, the I, what feels personal, is actually a shared experience. We all have it. It's like that. In other words, there is no unique you in that way. Let's see. This one says, there is no origin. That's a good one too. That one really comes down to this perceived sense of cause and effect that shows up. I think from a very young age, we become kind of addicted to this cause and effect relationship that seems to underlie all of our human experiences, that one thing leads to another thing. That's our sense of time. That's pretty much all of our interactions. That's why we work hard to achieve something, so on and so forth. It's like an addiction to this cause leading to effect. It's also the reason why we chase our tail over and over and over, like in a circle, like a merry-go-round, because we think that we can cause an effect. But consider this for just a while, that maybe that cause and effect is not a fundamental aspect of our universe. Maybe cause and effect is only a fundamental aspect of how the mind works, of thought. And so if we're always looking for an origin, we are actually overlooking the effect. If we're always looking for a cause or a reason why, and I hear this often, it's an interesting assumption that most human beings have. I don't know why I feel this way. Who cares? Why does the why matter? It's because there's an assumption that if I know the why, that somehow I can prevent this or I can change this experience that's happening now. That's the trick, is that this experience is unchangeable. It's already done. It's presented. There's no avoiding what already is. It's like saying, well, I need to know why it rains. so I can avoid the rain that's happening now. Doesn't actually make sense. There's a dissonance in that. So the pointing of there is no origin is reminding you that there's no need to find what caused this. And even if you've done this, even if you've looked into your own life and your own experiences, I mean, even around anger, oh, this is what upsets me. Does it change the experience once you find out what the cause is? Or is that just kind of chasing your own tail? I think what you'll find is if you find the why, it becomes irrelevant. The why seems to matter not. So maybe sit with this, maybe discover this. There is no origin, there's no cause. This doesn't come from anywhere. And another card that's in here somewhere says, be with the effect. Just sit with the effect. That's the encouragement. Be present with what is as it is. And really, if you even look at this in a practical way, that's the rub. That's the point. That's the whole shebang right there. If you can be with anything as it is, then you aren't spending your entire existence consuming energy to desperately prevent that which cannot be prevented. If you can be with anything as it is, especially in this internal landscape, what we're feeling, if you're not resisting, avoiding, or hesitating around what's being felt, then what else would you resist, avoid, or hesitate around at all? It all stems from this internalized experience that's being contextualized by the mind. Everything is sensational. Your entire life is guided by sensation. So you can either come in contact with what you are feeling, what is being felt, or you can live a life of compensation. I think it's a pretty safe guess to say that you already know what it's like to live a life of compensation. That's why you're here. Doesn't seem to work. Compensating doesn't seem to bring us any sense of peace or joy, mainly because there's a sense of we know this instead of resting in this unknown experience that's right on the periphery of everything right now. It's in the periphery of thought. It's on the edge of every sensation. It's on the edge of the visual field and the sound field. It's on the edge of what's being smelled, tasted, touched. Bring full attention into the periphery. And then you won't need to find this objectified origin, because it's just kind of a funny game. Constantly searching for some sort of cause. We still live in the effect. That's it. There is only the effect. So we found the cause, but here we are still in the effect. It's kind of funny. I mean, do you see the cosmic joke in play? The punchline is building itself. Well, I found the cause and I'm still in the effect. It's a gamble. We think we can somehow avoid it in the future. Avoid feeling a certain way in the future. But that doesn't seem to work. And this is all around attempting to mitigate, control, or otherwise move away from what we're feeling, what our experience is in this internal landscape. That's the whole essence of existential torture, existential suffering. What's even more remarkable is that the body and the body mind isn't able to tell the difference between what is existential and what is palpable and tangible. So that whole piece right there is the juicy part. Anger has a massive chunk of this. Really, because anger seems to be such an uncomfortable experience, we do everything we can to avoid it. And by avoiding it, we essentially create the exact environment, the exact circumstances that therefore manufactures it. It is this way. Whatever we run from, whatever we're attempting to elude, will chase, and whatever we chase will continue to elude, because it's all contextual saying, well, it's over there. Well, if it's over there, it's always over there. But if it's here, that takes a different tone. What is it to rest in the fire? What is it to be purified? We see these same symbols throughout essentially all human experiences. The phoenix burns itself into ashes and is reborn. That is resting in the fire. Jesus is crucified and is resurrected. That is resting in the fire. These are all pointings to awakening. It's all pointing the same direction. The story of Siddhartha, the Buddha story, at the base of the Bodhi tree, it's the same story. And I'm sure we can come up with countless and countless other examples. It's all metaphor. Wisdom is like that. Wisdom doesn't have the detail, but the theme is clear. The theme of experience is clear. The theme of all thought is sensation. And that's how we find that thoughts tell on themselves, because if we do not become attached to the detail, we start to see the theme, and the theme always points the same direction. It's attempting to move us away from what we're experiencing now. And that desperate attempt is really the essence of suffering. If you are what you feel, regardless of the context, regardless of the quality of that experience, and you reject that experience, you are essentially rejecting yourself. And that is the outset of all suffering. So the encouragement here is, regardless of experience, anger seems to be the theme today. It's the theme this week. You must burn in the fire. Learn to reconcile with that particular experience. Let the quality of that experience speak for itself, and you will eventually see that it's all the same. It's all empty ultimately. But every experience of that which stands out or which feels like too much to handle is a portal to emptiness. It's being objectified. And so become the object. If subject becomes object, there is no longer subject, no longer object. Treat it like a game. Let it collapse. Let it collapse into itself by becoming experience, becoming every sensation, becoming all experience. This is such a powerful pointing. It's the title of the Nissargadatta book. I am that. I am that. And then it starts to become so thorough, so effortless, so automatic, because it's already happening. The house of cards is collapsing now, that we just are kind of taken into the becoming. That's essentially what this is. The becoming. What's the difference between bliss and the fire of anger? Be certain about that, because otherwise there's an assumption taking place that this feeling is not bliss. And that only seems to show up in the moment. And can you prove that? Can that be verifiable? Isn't there an intensity of bliss? Isn't there an intensity of peace? But it's this fixation that there's something other than this. And that particular wanting to move away from this is always going to result in that tinge of dissonance and suffering. No need. Let every object of experience collapse into the portal of emptiness. When you see how empty the fire is, then there is clear seeing. But in order to see the emptiness of the fire, we must burn. Prove that it can hurt you, because it cannot. I mean, I can guarantee that the sensations that you feel in this existential way have no qualities of danger. But what we're doing is essentially breaking the system that's making that assumption automatically for us. The one that's contextualizing as yeses and nos. And I think you'll find that the mind is not able to really keep track of the nos, or the yeses rather, the effortlessness, but it definitely keeps track of what is no, the resistances. And that's what our entire construct of identity is built around, is no. You, if there is a you there and you feel like there's a you, are built around no. This is the benefit of yes. This is the benefit of effortlessness. This is the benefit of moving so thoroughly into the no that you don't know what it is anymore. You could put it this way: know the no so completely that you don't know what no is anymore. That's it. Sure, simple, not always easy. It's always this way. Simple, not always easy. Simple, not always easy, until we don't give a shit if it's easy anymore. It's like that. So that's the intensity of the fire. That's the intensity of the anger. That's the intensity of moving into the jaws of the dragon. Our whole lives, we know what it is to be the head of the serpent. Now is when you become the tail, become consumed. Take that path and take it all the way. It has an essence of death, fear, these things. But that's all. It's all construct. And there's only one way to really know that and prove it, and that's to live it, to be it. This is the boldness of the path. This is the diligence. This is the fortitude. And you'll find that there's an interfacing between curiosity and courage here. The curiosity has that light tone. The courage has the one of maybe some depth or some challenge or some friction. They are essentially the same thing. It's all elements of authenticity. And all authenticity is a felt experience. There is no knowledge of authenticity. It's just known, not intellectually. It is felt. That's what knowing is. Knowing, wisdom, are felt experiences. Gain some wisdom around the fire. If it's burning, be wise. Know it well. Reconcile. Become it. And then what you'll see is the spectrum of experiences that we call sensations or emotions is all essentially the same. It points the same way. It is essentially empty. All portals of the same oneness, the unification of existence, the collapsing of creation and reference, the collapsing of the house of cards, and all constructs fall here. And at some point, it might take a tone of death. At some point, it'll bring up that existential fear. The funniest part about it is we're not really afraid of not existing. If you sit with it, you'll start to see that our greatest fear is that we exist at all. Because that somehow imparts some sort of responsibility. Sit with that for a bit, you'll see. It has nothing to do with the vacancy of experience. It has everything to do with the management of experience. We're not afraid of death. We're afraid of being alive. Isn't that interesting? Points to that concept in the Bible of the original sin. Just by existing, I suffer. Just by existing, I have sinned. That's only something that comes from the mind. Every aberration of experience, anything that stands out, every object, is a portal. I am that. Best place to start is that which is absolutely intimate, and that will feel like a sensation. It'll feel personal. The more personal, the better. What feels more personal than anger or fear? Become that. Move into it. Burn in the fire. This is Kali. This is the phoenix. This is the purification. And with that, I have a session coming up. This one was short. Thank you for all being here today. I know it took a different tone. Still, really nice to sit with you all. And I guess I'll see you next week. All right.